As usual, guys, all the things I am about to read and say in this video are coming from this book written by John Bradshaw titled The Homecoming, a really brilliant book that details just how children get wounded, during childhood, and when children who have been through abuse in childhood do not deal with it, how that can end up contaminating the adult life. So we end up becoming adult children instead of full adults, right? We become adults with childlike behaviors. Yeah, basically. Okay, so the word that John Bradshaw uses to basically describe how the wounded inner child contaminates the adult life is the word contaminate. In the last video, we started with the word, the letter C. So now we're on the letter O. Okay, here we go. Ross. Offender behaviors. We tend to think that all people who have a wounded inner child are nice, quiet, and long-suffering. But in fact, the wounded inner child is responsible for much of the violence and cruelty in the world. Hitler was chronically beaten in his childhood. He was humiliated and toxically shamed by a sadistic father who was the bastard son of a Jewish landlord. Hitler reenacted the most extreme form of that cruelty on millions of innocent people. Now, it's not even about Hitler, but yeah, it's pretty interesting to see why Hitler ended up doing the things that he did. It's inexcusable, and it will always be some evil, fucked up shit. But we can see how just the wounded inner child can cause so much damage when we are not dealing with our wounds, when we are not tending to them, healing from them, and taking them very seriously. We need to take them so seriously. We need to be breaking these generational curses, and that is why I am making these videos. My client Dawson comes to mind. When he came to see me about a problem in his marriage, he was a bouncer in a nightclub. He spoke of breaking a man's jaw earlier in the week. He passionately described how the man made him do it. He had aggravated Dawson by acting tough around him. Frequently, in the course of my counseling with Dawson, he spoke in this manner. Offenders take no responsibility for their behavior. I'm going to say that again. Offenders take no responsibility for their behavior. Guys, I'm not making this shit up. It's a literal book. This is a book that has been published, vetted, authorized. It's a clinical psychology approved book. I'm not making this shit up in my head, okay? Offenders take no responsibility for their behavior. Right, I'm going to continue reading. As we worked together, it became clear that often Dawson was actually scared. When he felt fear, it triggered memories of the little boy that he once had been. His father had been violent and physically abusive to him. As the little boy of long ago, trembling in the wake of his brutal father's rage, it wasn't safe to be his own terrified self. Shucks. So, Dawson identified with his father's self. That is, he identified with the person who abused him in his childhood. When anything resembling the childhood scenes of violence occurred, it triggered the old feelings of fear and powerlessness. And Dawson became his brutal father, inflicting the same wounds onto others that his father had inflicted on him. Offender behavior is the major source of human destruction. It is the result of childhood violence and the suffering of unresolved grief of that abuse. The once powerless wounded child becomes the offender adult. In order to understand this, we have to understand that many forms of child abuse actually set up the child to be an offender. This is especially true of the physical abuse, sexual abuse, yes, molestation is included, and even amongst family members, especially amongst guys, just because it's family, I'm telling you now, blood does not mean shit. It means fuck all. Especially when it comes to your peace, your sanity, your being, just like, I mean, just like, 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 just like Yeah. I don't know. I didn't have the words to really explain. It's really heavy shit, the things that I'm reading. And I'm still reading this book, by the way, because it's so hard to read on my own. But yeah. Offender behavior is the major source of human destruction. It is the result of childhood violence and the suffering of unresolved grief of that abuse. The once powerless, wounded child becomes the offender adult. In order to understand this, we have to understand that many forms of child abuse actually set up the child to be an offender. This is especially true of physical abuse, sexual abuse, and severe emotional battering. The psychiatrist Bruno Bettelheim coined a phrase for this process. He called it identifying with the offender. Sexual, physical, and emotional violence are so terrifying to the child that he cannot remain his own self during the abuse. In order to survive the pain, the child loses all sense of his identity and identifies instead with the offender. Bettelheim conducted his studies primarily among survivors of German concentration camps. In one of my recent workshops, a therapist from New York raised her hand. She identified herself as Jewish and proceeded to tell our group the gruesome details of her mother's experience in a Nazi concentration camp. The most startling part of her story was that her mother had treated her as the Nazi guards had treated her mother. That's deep. That is so deep. Her mother spat on her and called her a Jewish pig as early as 3 years old. Perhaps even more disturbing are the sexual offenders. This is deep. Ugh. More often than not, they themselves were sexually violated as children. When they molest children, they are reenacting the abuse they experienced in their own childhood. While most offender behavior is rooted in childhood, it is not always the result of abuse. Some offenders were spoiled by their parents through overindulgence and over-submission, so that they learn to feel that they were superior to others. Such pampered children come to believe that they deserve special treatment from everyone and they can do no wrong. They lose all sense of responsibility, believing that their problems are always someone else's fault. Offender behavior. Deep. Very deep. I hope you guys are having a good day.